The Voice of Climbers.
Un saluto a tutti gli ascoltatori e le ascoltatrici di Climbing Radio, benvenuti a questa puntata speciale di Voice of Climbers in compagnia di Aidan Roberts, al microfono Silvia e qui accanto a me Alberto Milani, lo conoscete benissimo. Ciao Alberto, grazie per essere qui con noi.
Ciao Silvia, grazie a te per ospitarmi, ma non potevo essere assente a intervistare un boulderista di livello come Aidan. Penso che tutti lo conoscano, comunque Aidan Roberts è davvero uno dei rappresentanti a più alti livelli del bouldering attuale, sia come salite, uno che di 9 anni ha fatti tanti, ne ha fatti ben 3 al Fane e poi le 2 First Ascent di Spots of Time e Arrival of the Birds, e abbiamo avuto l'opportunità appunto di sentirlo qua ai microfoni di Climbing Radio, grazie anche all'intermediazione dei ragazzi di Patagonia, comunque che ci hanno messo in contatto con lui proprio per parlare anche di questo suo viaggio negli Stati Uniti, in cui ha salito The Dark Side, la linea più dura della Yosemite, però appunto partendo dalle sue ultime cose, sarà bello ritornare all'indietro per parlare della visione di uno dei boulderisti più ispiranti, a mio parere, del boulder moderno, quindi non vediamo l'ora di sentirlo.
Hi Aidan, thank you very much for being with us today on Climbing Radio. Welcome on Climbing Radio.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, you've just come back from the US. We have learned that on your social media, but you've not just come back, you sailed back from the US. Would you like to tell us something about this experience and this adventure in the US?
Yeah, of course. Well, actually, in full transparency, I didn't sail back. I actually flew back from the US, which was quite a big thing for me as well. So I actually sailed to the US. Part of the reason for that is I had, for many different reasons, and it kind of changed over the period of time in which I wasn't flying, but I'd made a commitment not to fly since 2019. So I had been traveling by alternative means and had wanted to climb in the US for many years and wanted to explore a bit more of the US. I'd been to Colorado at the time when I was competing in World Cups. So knew I'd climbed a bit in Colorado, so knew I wanted to go back. And of course, it took me many years to almost commit to such a big trip, because I knew at the time it would involve like a voyage sailing across the Atlantic, and then and in the end I sailed down into Central America and took public transport up north into California. So it was about a 2-month trip to get there. And initially I'd gone with the intention to spend 6 months there. I've taken like a tourist visa, and it was going to be like a climbing trip, and I was going to like travel. I expected to do like a road trip during like the winter season, and then at the end of that to sail back and have it as like a complete journey that maybe would take around 10 months, 2 months traveling either side, and then a 6-month trip. And it was very different to how I expected, in that I arrived and was really captivated by the place. I really loved it in California. I spent almost my whole winter in Yosemite, and I met some really good people out there. And so really developed like a very kind community of climbers and good friends who I was like spending a lot of my time with. And so felt it felt very different. It felt like it didn't. In previous years, I've traveled a lot and traveled around the UK or around Europe, and I've always been kind of on the go, like a bit of a nomadic lifestyle. And I arrived here and made these connections with these people, and like really liked the place, and realized that it was somewhere where I wanted to be based. And so almost it was not expected, but I decided that it was somewhere that I would like to live a bit, or like spend more time there in the coming years. And so with that in mind, it was really important for me to like maintain my connection with my family and my friends in the UK as well. I'm very close to my family. and looking forwards, it felt unattainable to sail back and forth every time I wanted to come and see them, which makes sense, I think. 4 months of travel to catch up with my family was too big of a commitment. So I actually flew back, which was very different for me. But I feel confident in the reasons why it felt important to me. And I think in the coming years I'll spend more of my time in California. And so it feels important to maintain my family connection.
Yeah, for sure.
And what made it an adventure besides performance?
Well, I think it's interesting you say. Definitely before I went on the trip, I'd been doing a lot of traveling around Europe for many years beforehand. I would often live out my van. I'm in my van at the moment. And I was on the road a lot, but my trips were very focused around very specific projects, and so I'd almost develop a routine around how to try the project and control a lot of my life around the actual climbing as well, just for sake of performance. And so almost my trips were very predictable. I knew the place I was going because I'd been there before, and I knew where I was going to stay, the people I was going to be with. Often I would climb a bit more by myself because I'd have total control over my climbing days and could find the right windows, and just for flexibility. So it was almost I was controlling more and more of these factors around my climbing. And so in the end, in some ways it felt really not so adventurous. Even though I was traveling, I was on the road and in my van, all of these trips were so predictable that it didn't feel so much like adventure. And so the trip to the US was really different in that I'd never sailed before, and it was 6 weeks of sailing and stopping off in islands. We stopped off in the Canary Islands, and then Cabo Verde, Martinique, and then Panama. And then I traveled through Central America on buses, and all of it was a really different experience, learning to sail and the pace of life at sea, and then the cultural difference in all the places I traveled. It was it was all very unknown experiences for me. So I think it really felt like an adventure because I really didn't know what I was getting myself into almost.
And while you were there, you had a lot of adventure, but you managed to send some boulders, some very
Yeah.
difficult boulders. I think that that's the topic of the next question.
Yeah, indeed, you had a special trip in some ways because also you take practically a stop from social media, so nobody knew about what you were doing in US, apart from some very nice scenes such as the dark side, which is now an iconical boulder in Yosemite because it has been a very long project from I think many years for Carlo Traversi. And then he sent it, I think, 2 years ago or something like that, 3 years ago. And then
Yes.
you repeated it, and it is a very peculiar boulder as far as I know, on an historical boulder of Camp 4, a peculiar line because it is very tricky, very technical, very slopey. Can you tell about this line and the process that you had on it for your ascent?
Yes, of course. No, it was interesting actually. I didn't know so much about Yosemite climbing before I went. And so in many ways I'd expected to spend a little bit of time there. I had some friends who really liked climbing there. But I thought it would be a short stop. And almost in more recent years I've definitely uh gravitated towards a more physical style of climbing as well, and I knew the style there was very different. It was it's very technical and nuanced, and I knew actually I've liked that when I was much younger, but I had spent much more time on these much more physical boulders in more recent years, and almost the training side of preparing for those. Um, and it's interesting, Yosemite is a really hard place to train for, in that the style is so nuanced that I feel like there are very physical things you can train, but you can't just be strong. Um, and it was interesting because traveling there, I had almost like 2 months where I wasn't climbing, and I was training along the way, but it was really hard to know my physical shape. Um, and I arrived in Yosemite, and it felt like it was like I was back to school. Like, actually, the first day I climbed on the dark side, and actually on the physical moves, I felt quite good. And it didn't feel too difficult. And then you are on like small holes, and it's like quite crimpy and more powerful at the bottom. And then you enter this like iconic slope rail where it's all about your body position and like kind of very small changes in like how you hold the holds, and it's like very friction dependent, and you can have like tries where it feels almost impossible and then tries where it feels almost effortless. And when you first try it, nearly all of those tries are impossible, and like you get like a hint of one where you're like, oh, maybe that was working, and you kind of have like piece them together. And it was a really interesting boulder, interesting process climbing on that boulder, because um, every every session it felt like my body became more intuitive in the positions, and I learned how to hold the holds well and how to move really carefully, and it felt like a really good a really good introduction to climbing on this like kind of iconic Yosemite granite. And so that was actually, I started trying that right at the start of my trip, and did it earlier in my season. And it really felt like representative of my like winter season, because I continued to spend the whole winter in Yosemite, and um, climbing on that really like felt like it was like a big part of my like learning process to move well on that style of rock. Um, and yeah, it was definitely humbling initially, and uh, and yeah, really satisfying to make these like uh, realizations that actually you can't just climb with this brute force. And I think actually now, I've done a lot more training over the summer and like focus more on like my physical shape, and I think like there'll be lasting impacts of me trying that boulder in that, or me climbing in Yosemite generally, just for sake of like understanding how much you have to gain from focusing on the nuance and the technical side of climbing.
So the next question is about Katie Lamb repeating this line. But before asking you that, I would like to ask you, how is it training on a sailboat?
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, we had to get creative. So actually, the captain of the boat was really generous, and he was really happy. He's not a climber at all, but he was curious about our climbing, and like there was three other climbers on the boat, and and he allowed us to like build this construction, where we essentially had like a slightly overhanging panel that was maybe it was like 3 foot, 4 foot wide or something, but only like uh three, so it was maybe like just over a meter by like just under a meter. It was like this like small like overhanging board, and in the middle there was like a vertical panel which had a fingerboard on it and some small edges. So we had like a beast maker and some small edges, and then on the other panel there was just little holds. And actually we didn't climb at all. We'd just climb without the feet. So it would just be like this freestanding panel. We didn't have space to build a whole board, so it was just like small holds, and it was like campsing without feet on these small holds. Um, which was challenging because when you're at sea, the boat is moving really quite aggressively. And so sometimes if you like get the timing wrong and you like are trying to like campus
Yeah.
when the boat is rising up a wave, you feel so heavy. Like, like it's like you've got like a weight vest on and you can like barely keep your arms straight. And then you time it the other way and you feel like completely weightless. And so it's really hard to like have a measure at all of whether you're feeling in good shape, because um you don't know if it's just like the effect of the movement that's making it hard. And then we would stop off like generally we had a few stops. There was like one chunk in the middle from Cabo Verde to Martinique that I think took us like 18 or 19 days or something. But when we would stop off in these other places, we'd still use that because there wasn't always climbing walls, and it was much easier. So yeah, training at sea was hard. And then I also had like a fingerboard edge, like just like an edge which I use with like a force plate, like a tin deck, and then I could like kind of measure the force I was putting through it. So I was doing a lot of that, and then using like bands to do some like more physical exercises for my shoulders and arms, and then I'm doing a lot of stretching. It's amazing when you're at sea and there's no phone reception or like any like you don't have any distractions in many ways. You realize the days are actually really long, and so so you have a lot of time to do training. So actually I was training a lot. It would feel like many hours of every day. But I liked it. It gave me like some structure and some routine, and yeah, it was good. It definitely was like not necessarily good for my climbing. I didn't feel good initially, but I think there was like things I gained from it as well. There was like I focused on some things which I think were valuable for me coming into the climbing season, even if I wasn't moving very well at the start of my trip.
Going back to Katie Lam repeating the dark side, was she on the boat with you? Did you meet her there? How was the process of climbing together, and what do you think of her achievement?
Yes. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I actually I'd met her before I went over to the US. And so I actually my first session climbing the dark side, she actually showed it to me. So I climbed most of my sessions when I was climbing with people were with Katie and Randy Puro, who is a bit of a Yosemite legend. He lives in Yosemite and has developed a lot of the bouldering out there. And so I actually spent most of my season climbing with those guys. And yeah, my first session on the dark side, my first few sessions actually were climbing with Katie. And they were both there actually when I climbed it. And then they continued to try it throughout the season. And yeah, Katie did it at the end of the season, which yeah, was really amazing. Actually, I was also there the day that Katie climbed it. And it was like, yeah, it was quite amazing. It's a very different boulder for us in that most people have slightly different methods, but it makes a big difference if you are shorter or taller, which is a lot shorter. And so the crux was much like her hardest move was much more difficult, and it was like not such a bad section for me. Just I have longer arms. It was amazing to see actually her whole process trying it was amazing feat of tenacity, perseverance. Anyway, it was like not all progression. There was ups and downs. So if anything, it was almost more impressive for me as like a feat of mental perseverance than just a physical one as well.
Yeah. Yes, then I think that Katie is one of the most inspiring boulderer now in the world, also for her perspective of bouldering. And also the case of the dark side is peculiar because based also on what you just said, it shows how there are so many factors involved in climbing, apart from strength and so on, that practically reduce the gap between men and women in climbing, also from the point of view of a result. And it is a very peculiar of climbing as a sport. Well, what do you think about that? Because in no other sport there is a so limited gap between men and women in final results.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I'd thought about this because I think a similar time when Katie did the dark side, Brooke did Excalibur.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it's one of the first times in climbing where
The
the
first,
difficulty
no, the first 90
between
plus for a woman.
yeah, but in like more like in a more like larger scale in climbing, for the difficulty of like both men and women to be only one grade, like like a plus grade difference. Like we have men climbing up to 9A and women climbing up to 8C plus and
Yeah.
9B plus and 9C. It's like extremely close. And yeah, I think it is interesting because it like you say, it really spotlights the number of factors that are like so relevant to outdoor climbing. Like I feel like look at climbing these days and I see like a real emphasis on like the physical side of climbing. You like measure yardsticks of like performance are measured through like climbing on kilter boards or these like standardized boards, which like are much more lean into this like kind of what are more commonly associated as like male traits of strength and things. And I think it's easy to see like a lot of momentum in that style, and yet question why it's not necessarily translating as well to like seeing that performance excel in rock climbing. And I think this is a good example actually where um, being like an intelligent climber and like kind of being very strategic. And I also think there's like a mental side of climbing to like deal with setbacks and like kind of persevere when things aren't going to plan, which is a real skill that maybe isn't given as like enough credit as it deserves. Like I think like often it's easy to see people who are incredibly strong and be like, oh well, they could climb this hard if they wanted to. And like I think yes, if they were capable of putting like 30 sessions into this climb, 20 of them like are like not meeting their expectations, and yet they still like return and like kind of maintain motivation and still continue to show up, like they're physically capable of doing it. But I think it's easy to assume that the like tenacity is like something that people just overcome. And I actually think that like mental fortitude is like really quite unique trait. There were like a lot of like incredibly physically strong climbers that actually aren't capable of committing themselves to something that they don't know they're going to do. And so I mean, I think I see nowadays in climbing, you see some really impressive climbers that are like doing hard climbs incredibly quickly, like flashing things or doing them in a session. And I'm like, wow, it's physically really amazing. But I think something that we don't see so much is seeing people go through these like epic journeys of trying boulders where like things don't go to plan, and they're like, I find them more inspiring also almost when like you see these people who are like maybe not physically at the top of the sport, like in terms of physical ability, but they are able to continue to show up and climb in very intelligent ways, and they persevere when things aren't going well. And I find when people do that and they do things, I find it really impressive. But maybe lots of climbing media doesn't put the emphasis on that quite so much. But in the example of like Brooke and Katie doing these climbs, I think like it's somewhere where like that really stands out and it really shines.
Yeah.
Okay, we certainly agree. And now, going back to some of your previous scents and climbs, we would like to ask you something about Spots of Time, a climb that shows also this kind of attitude you were talking about. And this line that you have climbed, it was a first ascent, right?
Yep.
Yes, and has been repeated by Will Bosey, and we had the opportunity to interview Will at the Rockmaster, and he talked us about a little bit about this line. We can see an extract from the interview now. So in the previous interview you've done with a colleague here, you said you find Spots of Time a very nice boulder, even if some people, not everyone, thinks it's so beautiful, so nice. What's nice about it? What do you think of the boulder?
Yeah, it's so in videos it looks quite small, I think, is what most people have, or what some people have complained about, I've seen. But actually when you're there it doesn't feel so small, and it's mostly the rock is perfect, and where the line is like this perfect cut of the rock. Just the like exact number of holds to be possible. And I think the best thing though is just the place. You're on in the Lake District in England, and it's on the side of Helvellyn, one of the like most famous mountains there. You hike up part of the path and then you cut off. And so like on the way up is a bit more touristy, there's lots of people, and then you cut off and you're like completely alone in this little valley with this river, and it's overlooking this giant lake and these mountains in the background, and it's just such a nice relaxing place to be. And the boulder's amazing to climb. Like, it's so good and so much fun that it's just all of it together, I think, is one of my favorite boulders ever.
Okay, so I think Aidan can be happy with your...
Yeah, Aidan did very well with that boulder.
Okay. Will told us how that one of the best things about this boulder is the place. How important is the environment to you
Yeah,
in your
it's
climbing?
interesting. It's interesting, yeah. I think it makes a really big difference, but it's very hard to predict before you actually get there. It's like hard to understand what makes a place feel special. And I think often for every climb, it's different. And so during that time when I did both of these climbs, I'd been trying Arrival of the Birds. I'd been trying that for many years, since my first trip into Chino at the start of 2021. I'd seen that line really early on, and I'd continued to try it kind of since then, on and off. And it was like almost the main focus of my training. It was felt like a really iconic place. I felt really lucky to like have found a climb in such like a style that was interesting to me. Felt like it suited me really well, and felt so ambitious for me. It felt like I had to get better in the style which I'm best suited to, which was quite motivating. And so that very much like led some direction of my like climbing trips and my training, especially. So over the series of years trying that, I was definitely organizing my calendar years around trying that mostly. And that was like a really interesting one, because it was a much longer process than lots of other climbs that I've tried. And that climb felt special for me for many different reasons, but I think a part of it was it felt special because it represented a lot of change in my own climbing. It made me like, throughout that process, I really learned around like I learned about like how to prepare well for climbing, how to be like conservative. I really learned a lot of patience, and it made me a much like more tactical climber in some ways, and also really made me embrace like the things I was good at, and like relinquish a little bit of like control over the things I was bad at as well. So like I kind of realized that to excel further at the things that suit me well, and I felt like I had to do this climb, I had to let go of the idea that I could excel at everything. And so I think I became much more specialized as a climber, and I'm really glad that I did that. And I think like being really like feeling a lot of direction within my climbing felt really valuable with that climb. So I was really able to like visualize that like I really wanted to do this climb, and I could work backwards in a very specific way to understand how to prepare for it. So I think in many ways that boulder gave me like a real faith in climbing, and that in the training process and preparing for climbs. And I think in terms of the place there, for me, it was interesting because I began to feel really familiar in the place. I like was meeting people like this similar people when I'd go back, and um, I was like traveling in my van, and I was developing these routines which made me feel like quite comfortable on the road, like somewhere which like is unfamiliar. I could like make feel quite comfortable for myself, and I think that's been really helpful for me as well. Like beginning to feel comfortable and like relaxed even when I'm in like new places or different places. And I think I probably learned a lot of that through spending a lot of time in Ticino and like it becoming more familiar in some ways. But then Spots of Time was something that I worked on for about a year, and that was really special to me because that's really close to where I grew up. It was times when actually I was traveling in my van. I'd come back and stay at my family home, and it was amazing because the rock is really quite incredible on it, and it's quite unique for the area. So I grew up in the Lake District in northwest England, and there's some nice climbing, but and it's very varied. But I felt at one point that like the potential of climbing there for me was more limited, and so I was traveling further afield to look for like ambitious things within my climbing, and I felt really fortunate because that was like a real full circle. I was like I'd been looking and been like trying these projects further away from home, and then really just on my doorstep there was like this climb that really like challenged me in these different ways, um and so it was like I developed like a really nice like rhythm to my years where like to that year where I would be training and preparing for my trips coming to Switzerland to try a rival, and I could just be climbing on Spots of Time, and there was no reason for me to train for it because I could just try it, and so it felt really nice, and it felt it felt nice actually to do it in the end, and I actually had some nice conversations with Will when he was trying it, and then when he did it, and he actually really valued the place as well, which was really comforting for me because I really liked the routine of trying that boulder, and that landscape felt so familiar to me. It was like where I grew up, um, and so it felt like a really special place to me. And when I spoke about the climb, um, I felt like I could talk about how the location of it felt like it was such a big appeal of the climb to me. And it was nice then that people who have subsequently gone and tried it have actually like also shared that. So almost it was like a nice affirmation that it wasn't just the nostalgia of the landscape that was special to me, but actually it was just like confirming that it is quite a special place that I grew up in. And it's I don't know, there was more there. I think that boulder especially, there was like a sense of pride because of the value of the place, and the value of the place to me personally. And I think going forwards, I do really understand the role of like a place feeling special to me, and I think it was a big reason why Yosemite was so appealing to me. It feels like a place of such like climbing history, and it is like really quite a beautiful valley, and it's very dramatic. And I think in many ways doing a new climb in somewhere like Yosemite where the place like feels familiar now and feels really special, like holds a lot more value than maybe places which don't have the same grandiose feel to them.
Yeah. Very, very well, very nice. My next question would have been about arrival of the birds, but practically you already answered us before, and so I will be back on Lake District and the history of climbing in Britain, in England. First of all, Lake District is one of the places where practically bouldering was born, because Oscar Eckenstein at the end of the 19th century was already active there, and in some places. So it's even if few people knows about that, it's really an historical place for bouldering. But in general, Britain is I love Britain climbing scene and history, because it's full of very peculiar people, very peculiar climbers. And also I love the kind of climbing, because the landscape, also finding the condition in the weather, which is not so, how to say, easy to find in in Britain. So how also the history of Britain climbing has influenced your perspective of climbing, of bouldering in your case, and also the people who made the history in England for climbing.
Yeah, it is interesting. I feel like that history is it's easy for me to sometimes take it for granted, having like a rich history to like a climbing culture, and it is sometimes nice to step back and then see how much of that has like been built into the climbing culture in the UK. And I've like met lots of I mean, some real climbing legends. I've climbed a lot with Ben Moon, and I climbed in the schoolroom a lot, and like these like kind of like training bases. But I like have, and in the Lake District, like it is really nice. I like how there were certain areas where like feats of climbing are still like passed down through like rumor almost. And well, I don't know if you heard about this person who did this move in this way, and you kind of like have all these like small little bits of history that are like that I've like acquired a lot over the years. And uh I have always been intrigued by the history, but I don't feel like uh I often don't feel like it's been like as important to me as for some people. I feel like I know a lot of people who like really are um psyched about the history of climbing, which I think is really nice, but I I still feel like the most special part of climbing for me now anyway feels like a lot in um the creative side of like visualizing projects and like developing new things. And there's a real creative side of that which I feel like requires you to like open your mind and look forwards almost. And so I think there's definitely like um there's definitely a value to like climbing history, and I think it can like bring a certain like gravity to a place. And I like think I feel a lot of like pride of like around climbing in the Lake District, or it feels really valuable. I think there is a real value in developing climbs in these places where they feel like they have history, where like that process feels like somewhat more of a contribution, say. Um, but I try and not like it doesn't feel like the most important thing for me at the same time. Like I like to have like quite a forward thinking view of my climbing as well, and it helps me to stay a bit more open minded and creative is a hope anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, you told a word creative, and indeed, my next question is about creativity, and in connection with what is now bouldering. I mean, I've been a boulderer for more than 25 years now, and sometimes my impression about the current world of bouldering and climbing in general is that is becoming more and more a search for grade, a search for the most obvious things. I mean, maybe very difficult boulders and so on, but the most social one and so on. And there are few boulders, and you are among of them, you, Katie Lamb, Bernd Zangler, my friend Nicky Cherry, and so on, who are searching to carry on somewhat a different perspective of bouldering, where creativity, exploration, the aesthetics of boulders, and so on is important, and it is quite a romantic quest for some point of view. What is your idea, your feeling about current bouldering, and also how do you think that the social media and then current communication can have a role both in the negative side or maybe in the positive side in giving a direction which is not only the search for difficulty, the search of grade?
Mm, yeah. Oh, it's an interesting question. It feels a very big question. But I definitely, uh, it's hard. I don't mean to, I don't like to be too negative around like the climbing, media or like climbing community. I think like actually they're really good people and in many ways physically are like incredibly inspiring. And like I think if I look at climbers now, I'm like, wow, the physical capability of climbing is progressing like in an amazing way. But I almost there is a certain dissatisfaction I find with like I almost feel like the creative vision of climbing is waning in some ways. Like it feels like it is not it is maybe not celebrated as much as I find it interesting anyway. So I think now in more recent years I've found climbing media much less interesting, much less inspiring. And I think that is definitely not because I think climbers are not getting better. Like I think the ability of climbers is like incredible, but I think maybe there are a lot fewer climbers who are bringing their own like vision to their climbing and like really fulfilling their potential in what they can what contributions they can make to climbing in some ways. And so I look up to like climbers like Nale, who like did this all around the world. He would like kind of maybe he'd do his own thing and he'd like go and develop these climbs which like I think were really futuristic and like still today are like real figureheads in like the greatest lines that have been done. And like you say, Nikki, I think is doing that a lot as well. And I know he's still developing so much around Aosta Valley in northern Italy. I've seen some photographs of his recent climbs he's done as well, and I've spoken to him a lot about it over the years. I like is there are these characters in climbing who I like really feel like have their own ideas around what makes an inspiring climb, and they feel confident in it, and they like have really they have a lot of like conviction in the reasons, the things that they look for in that climbing, and they really go and search for them. Whereas I feel maybe the role, and you kind of asked the question of like the role that media maybe plays in this, and like I think it maybe feeds into the way in which people view their climbing, because maybe the search for difficulty is the most easily communicated thing. So like some climber repeating a 9A boulder in 5 sessions is really easily communicated. Like you can, or you do it in 1 session and it's like, wow, here's this incredible feat, and like it can make headlines. And I think often it's like most eye-catching. We kind of know that media is becoming more fast-paced, and it's harder to like if we're like competing for very short periods of time and people's attention, it's harder to communicate something that is actually a much like deeper, like it has a lot more meaning than maybe these things that are like communicated very quickly. So I think in some ways like I'm much more inspired by someone doing like putting a lot of work into like developing a new climb that is much easier, and it's like something that they'd found inspiring, and they've like made all these mistakes and like kind of no doubt spent a lot longer figuring out how to do it, and developing something new feels a lot more interesting to me than someone repeating something that 5 other people have before them, kind of thing. And I think I can understand why these things get lost a little bit in the media, because somebody developing an amazing new 8C boulder maybe is less like newsworthy than somebody repeating a 9A boulder. But I think it's a shame, because it feels like if all that's celebrated is people like repeating these 9A boulders, it's understandable that these climbers and athletes who like rely upon like media to be their like kind of source of income are going to like follow that, or there's going to be like a draw towards that. And in some ways, I don't feel like it encourages, like, it doesn't drive the sport forward in some ways. And there is like actually not so much incentive to be like, okay, like let's look for these new things which like fulfill my inspiration, or the things that I feel like where like the places where I feel like we could push climbing. And I think it would be nice for me to see that. And there are examples of it happening, definitely. I don't mean to be too negative about it, but I think the focus of it feels less on this for me.
And you are certainly an example of this kind of this attitude. Do you feel the responsibility of showing this? Do you think you might be a role model in this direction?
I don't know. I think I definitely talk about it. I think like it's hard. It's also hard to project like what climbing means to other people, and like for me it feels much more valuable like as a climbing experience to be like to learn to understand an incredibly difficult project. And it's very time consuming, takes a lot of time, well, to like visualize, clean, but like the practical side, yes, but then also to like be creative and continue to like refine your methods. It's like a much longer process than repeating something where you have a beta video. And like I really like this process. Like it's it requires a lot of patience, it requires a lot of like setbacks in some ways, but like this process is like really satisfying for me, and so I feel really inspired by that. And like finding things which like humble me and make me feel like I have to be a better climber, and like improving to and like learning to understand them and how to climb well on them, and also improving as a climber. This whole process is like the thing that really like inspires me within climbing. And I don't want to assume that for other people as well. So for some people, that like actually climbing might just be a much more physical feat for them, and the quality or like the vision for what the climbing they're doing and how it represents and how it like the role it plays in like the climbing community might not actually be that important for them. But it feels important to me, and it's nice for me when I see it seeming important for other people as well. So my hope is that some people do find that, but I definitely don't criticize people who don't.
No, for sure. But I think that now, I mean, there are most of the people probably is interested in bouldering and climbing as, let's say, a sport rather than an art. Okay, but in any case, I think that some voices, in particular the voices of top climber, in any case now are present, even in discussing, let's say, ethical problems. Such as knee pads adjustment to basis replicas, or even as an example, a very peculiar topic, which is the use of fun to create conditions which are not available in a given day, and so on, which are now discussed. I mean, sometimes only few people like me, always trying to being very, very close to the ancient ethics we're discussing,
Yeah.
but now many people are at least giving attention to these points. so for sure, I think that there is even a lot of room for discussion, or also to make a person more sensitive to some, let's say, different approaches to bouldering and climbing, which is not only a sport. So I'm positive too that this can be more and more present in the future, in the next future, and I hope also that many boulders and climbers could have also a perspective of climbing as a possibility to, as an expression of themselves and their creativity, and not only their ability and strength. I mean, and well, in your opinion, which could be, in this perspective, some new frontiers of bouldering? I mean, uh, or your
In
personal frontiers for bouldering?
like, as in like, where do I is this related to the questions of ethics around like
Yes, ethics,
what
or also some new perspectives of bouldering which maybe have not been explored so far, maybe in climbing trip. For me, an example is Bernd Zangler, what has done in Himalaya, in Rakcham, where indeed it is developing bouldering, but in a completely out of the world grounds. I mean, yeah, or many other ideas about bouldering, and maybe that you have any idea, peculiar or particular idea.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like um I feel it's very hard in some ways to give like a concrete example of where I feel like climbing can go, and because I feel like um in order to be quite like progressive, or like for people to be like um uh visionaries within climbing, actually I think the most important trait is to be like quite open-minded, and like uh not like so much be like, okay, this is what I'm looking for, but like keep an open mind to like what might be inspiring for different reasons. And I think that applies to like many different like many different avenues to climbing, in terms of like what the climb you are climbing on might look like, but then also like in terms of like the difficulty of a climb. Like um I think it's very hard to know, depending on different like rock types, areas, conditions, like to know how much you have to gain from all these different random factors. So I think there is like I think if we are looking to like envisage like progression within climbing, I think the traits we need to like really um lean upon and like kind of utilize well is of course like the increasing physical ability, but also the patience and perseverance, but also optimism of like the possibility of these things. And so like climbing in Yosemite is a really good example. Most of my projects are in Yosemite now, and there's one project in particular that I tried a lot, where like initially I was trying the climb and I thought I couldn't do it. I thought maybe it wasn't possible. The moves didn't feel possible really. And it was like easy to be demotivated. And I think in many cases I would have like stopped trying if I'd been like on uh in many of a many of the scenarios I would have like probably stopped trying it as a project. And then I essentially the conditions were quite bad, and this one stays much drier. And so I tried it for a series of more sessions. And every time I like kind of like would learn something different, and like kind of feel a little bit closer to the moves every time. And enough just to make me realize that actually I was still improving and still like making slight refinements, even though I didn't feel close to the moves. And like I could continue this process, and it was a real like amazing experience to like realize that you just don't know how far you have to develop in like, if you are just like patient and creative and like optimistic that something will work, or to stay encouraged. um you don't know like how far you can progress on these things. And so I like eventually completed the moves on this project, and I didn't climb it, but like it feels like I realized that it's possible, and it's like became a project for me. And like I think it was interesting because in many scenarios I wouldn't have persevered with that. And so I think there probably is a real importance to maintain this like kind of confidence and optimism that things are possible. And that requires like a really great level of motivation as well. So I think there are like more than like specific visions of what climbing can do. I think there are these traits around a climber which are really important to like, because I don't think I know where climbing can go, and I don't know like the potential of other climbers. I just know the traits about climbers that I think will take them to like their full potential in some ways.
That's perfect. And
So,
yes, yeah.
Aidan, I think we can go to the last question, which is, of course, about your future projects. We know you've just come back from the US. You have you left a project down there, as you've just said. But do you have other projects at the moment? How do you feel? Do you feel the depression, the sadness at the end of a long trip, a long adventure, or are you already psyched for the next adventure?
It's a good question. We have many different things to discuss, but in some ways, like it feels like my adventure in the US is only just beginning, really. I've only spent time in California, and it feels expansive. So I'm excited for that. I feel like almost adventure in the form of traveling to new places is like there's a lot of opportunity there. I think I feel really motivated on my climbing at the moment, and I feel curious and definitely motivated by my upcoming season in Yosemite. So I definitely think no sadness around like the end of this year, feeling like an adventure. It feels like actually it is just opened opportunities for more adventures, which is a great feeling. And I feel like, I'm very fortunate, obviously, to feel this way. So it feels like definitely still in the beginnings. But in terms of projects, most of my projects are definitely in Yosemite Valley. I like described this project briefly just a moment ago, and then I have two other projects which I spent a lot of time working on that are like more crimpy and longer, and I think would require different skill sets maybe. So I feel it would be very ambitious to try and complete these projects in a season. I like tried them a lot last season, but I will give it my best shot. And I've been doing lots of preparation for them. And thankfully, even if I were to do those, I have probably about 20 others that I've tried a little bit in Yosemite that I haven't done yet. So I feel inspired by one place to have so much potential, and to almost feel like the potential of the difficulty of the potential of the climbing there feels like it surpasses my physical potential. So I feel inspired to go to a place where like I feel like I will never run out of things to climb on, which is a good feeling. And right now, I mean, like more immediately, I'm actually in Maltertal in Austria. It's my first time here. Home to the famous like Bugeleisen climb, which is really amazing. Yeah, I climbed that yesterday.
Okay.
And
Congratulations.
thank you. And then I've also been trying Mount Doom, which is one of Nikolai Uznik. He joined us on a podcast I host, and he spoke about this climb quite a lot. And I saw the video of it, and I'd actually always it was interesting to me because I'd had a friend from France, Clem Le Chap, who many years ago when I'd been climbing with him in Ticino, he was like, "Oh, I think you should go to Maltertal and try this project because it looks really amazing. I think it could suit you well, and like it's like really difficult." And So I'd had it in my mind that I wanted to come here for quite some time, but I'd been trying my projects in Ticino so much, and then I went to the US, and I like hadn't found the time to come here, and then and then I'd seen that Nikolai had done it, and it was interesting because it was like I had like an idea of the project in my mind already from just Clem speaking to me about it, and then I saw it in real life, and I was like, wow, okay, actually, like it seems really amazing, and like and it was almost like an appealing idea, seeing as I'd spent like my year in California to travel to a new place, and I'd wanted to go to Malta for years. So it was like almost in some ways this feels like a travel. And
You
it
were
was really
dreaming about Malta already back in the US. Okay.
yeah. Well, no, I think I'd just been thinking about it for many years,
Yeah.
And so it was nice, and that actually I also feel quite comfortable in that I had a really long training season, maybe too long. I don't know. I was like really excited to climb on rock, and the season in Malta is a bit earlier than it is in Yosemite, and actually, I know that most of my inspiration lies in Yosemite, and like I'm most driven to climb on these projects there. And it's nice. I feel like I'm on this trip, and I really don't mind how things go. So like if I climb well, it's great, and if I don't do these climbs, it's also really okay. And so I really feel like pressure is off. I just wanted to enjoy climbing outside, and enjoy like being on a trip. And it's my first time in this area of Austria, so I've been enjoying the cafe and kuchen. And yeah, it's been really fun. So
Yeah.
I think it's good preparation as well. Like I've always find that there is like a time it takes me a little while to learn to climb well on rock after a training season, and so this is like a trip where I'm like beginning to move well on rock, and hopefully it will prepare me well for the Yosemite winter season.
And then you are also in a place which is an historical place for European bouldering, the home of Clem Loscott. We have also an esoteric line such as emotional landscapes there, which is one of the most iconic boulder of by Loscott, and yeah, I think that it's
Yeah.
really a very peculiar place and iconic place, Maltatal.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure. I was really excited. I felt like a kid when I walked up to Bugaleisen.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, it's really motivating for sure.
Yeah.
So, good luck, first of all, for this trip in Malta. We finished our questions for you, Aidan. But if you want to add anything, feel free, please. If we didn't ask you something that you thought might be important to you.
No, you asked great questions. Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you so much for your your answer and your histories and stories. Yeah.
Oh no, hey, no, thank you again. Thank you so much for having me, and yeah, no, it's been really fun to join you guys.
Thank you very much, Aidan, for being with us, for being such an inspiration, and for everything you told us. And so it was a pleasure speaking with you, and good luck with your projects in Malta, and see you next time.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah, have a lovely afternoon.
You too.
See you.
Ciao, Aidan.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Ciao, bye.
Ciao.
The voice of climbers.